Right, the other thing that's happened in the last 24 hours is that this time yesterday, it was like, oh, great news for Southern Hemisphere Rugby. South Africa is staying. So this is fantastic. And then the reports kind of started to read what had happened. It was like, they've agreed short term, they're going to stay for another year or two, but that's it. Like, it's very, look, the rugby politics, the people involved in the top level of rugby politics, they're such wonderful people, such stand-up people that, such an enjoyable group of people to spend time following and reading. And of all of the Alika-doos, it seems that the backstabbing and shenanigans that goes on at the top level of world rugby is the worst. It's like the House of Lords Tory party trying to organise their summer piss up. That's what it feels like. That's the level of competency that there seems to be.
Really?
In trying to. That's what it. Like, look at how all the World Cup bids work, and look at how look at how the law changes work, and look at the player welfare. We're big at player welfare. It's the most important thing for us. But and so I'm not talking specifically about the organisation World Rugby. I'm talking about the people who run all of the rugby in the world. They're like, I would say, singularly the most unimpressive group of sports administrators. And you can put your own county board up against them, and I'd say they come out going, "Whew, I'm glad we have this debt-ridden albatross around our neck. At least it's our debt-ridden albatross." But anyway, so I don't know what's going on with this. South Africa yesterday reported was like we're part of the Southern Hemisphere crew, and then today in the papers like South Africa are basically like 1 foot already in the Six Nations, which would then be 7 nations, or would it be Six Nations? Who knows?
Yeah, it's like very much South Africa commit to 2025, and also South Africa commit to 2025, and there is like definitely two different tones in the newspapers this morning as well. People taking the same piece of information and looking at it positively, and that same piece of information saying this is not good news. So that South Africa move, that, let's face it, is going to happen at some point. Something's going to happen with South Africa, maybe into the Six Nations in 2025, is going to affect things drastically. And this is allied with the World Nations Championship, which is back on our tables.
So explain the World Nations Championship.
You will remember this from things such as 2019, the pre-COVID World.
Flashbacks to Kevin Kilban here, but let's go.
This will be very Kevin Kilban because... And it's not even my fault.
Hey,
okay?
Kev.
It's not even my fault. It is because there is a lot of grey area around this already. So the World Nations Championship is essentially rugby's attempt to create a Nations League, because the point of the Nations League was to turn friendlies into more meaningful matches. The World Nations Championship are whispering the November friendlies are actually just friendlies. They're not tests. That's what they are saying here. That is the admission here. They want these games to count for something.
They're recalibrating the definition of the word test. They're updating it. Test 2.0.
No, recalibrating was good. That's a very corporate sounding word. So they're recalibrating. What this would involve is a tournament of 2 divisions, 12 teams in the tournament, and it would take place every second year. You would have in one of the 2 divisions the Six Nations, and then the other division will be...
Sorry, not one of the 2, the top one.
The top tier.
The top tier. We're tier 1 nation.
Tier 1.
We're the kings.
Yes, but that would be in one...
Sorry, that was my snout in the trough.
One section, and then the other section will be Sanzar, which still includes South Africa.
It's now Sanzar.
Sorry,
Did you see that?
That's what I tried to do. That's what I tried to do, but clearly it wasn't.
I was like, oh, okay. They've just shoehorned in an extra A.
Like, I mean, it would have been worse if it was like Fiji. What would they have done with that? Sanzar for Fiji are in. Japan are in, supposedly, to make up the rest of the 12. So you've got your Six Nations, the 4 from the Southern Hemisphere in the Rugby Championship, and then supposedly Fiji and Japan. That has yet to be ironed out. What would happen is that you would still have your summer tour to the Southern Hemisphere, but instead of going to New Zealand and playing 3 tests in New Zealand, you would play 3 tests against 3 different nations. So you would...
Give me an example of those.
You could go from New Zealand to Australia to Fiji. You could go from New Zealand to Japan to South Africa. Argentina to Australia to South Africa.
Argentina to Fiji flights.
What are we talking?
2-stop flights. $5 grand.
$5 grand, okay.
$7 grand from Rosario. From Buenos Aires, though, it's only $5.5 grand.
I know. Well, you get a good sponsor, though, right?
Well, I think certain airlines are like, happy days. This is what's the distance? I mean, I'm sorry. I'm busy scrolling out on the map here to see just how easy it is. Oh, you go the other side. You go there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's actually not the worst one.
When you're weighing up what direction of the planet you're going to take, it probably is a long enough flight.
Yeah, it seems to be.
Basically, there's going to be a lot of air miles, a lot of travelling if this thing happens, especially in the summertime. The November window.
They're saying you fly through Madrid or New York.
Well, that would make perfect sense, wouldn't it? I mean, that would definitely make this whole thing worth it.
That can't be right.
The world is a big place, it turns out.
There must be a mistake.
The Southern Hemisphere is not as tiny as it looks on the maps, is this morning's geography lesson. So that would be part of this, that you would have those 3 matches in the summertime, but against 3 different nations, and then you would have your November test, which would obviously be at home in the sort of traditional manner in which they're currently played, except it will go towards points for this World Nations Championship, and then the top team in one of the division would play the top team in the other division in a grand final at the end of November every second year, and that would be your World Nation Champion. So this has been on the table before. There's been a couple of things that have really set it back. First of all is the idea of promotion relegation. And this is for me where I get into the really confusing area, because this whole thing is predicated on the idea of the 6 nations being in Europe. If you suddenly have South Africa replacing Italy, do they then move out of the Rugby Championship cycle, not out of the Rugby Championship cycle, the Southern Hemisphere cycle, which would involve Northern Hemisphere teams moving down to the South? Do they move out of that, and then do you have to find somebody else to move into that, aka a Tonga or maybe even a USA? That I don't know, and I want to know how that actually factors in, because this
USA is a Northern Hemisphere team.
Exactly, but they're not a 6 Nations team, therefore they're in this other division, which makes relative sense because it's sort of, Japan's not a Northern Hemisphere team, let's not forget. Or it's not a Southern Hemisphere team. So whatever way you look at this is based quite a lot on geography, and it does get, I guess, it's given a bit of a foundation by the fact that in one division you have the 6 Nations teams all in Europe, and in the other tier you largely have Southern Hemisphere teams, the traditional Rugby Championship nations. So you can mould something around that. But if you take Italy out of one and you put South Africa in there, and then all of a sudden you've got another team put into the second batch of 6, things get muddied very easily here, and all of a sudden...
So South Africa can't move. You've got to bribe them not to move.
Like that would be the only way you could do this. And then the 6 nations are stuck with Italy, you would suggest.
Or maybe they could be incentivised to help Italian rugby as opposed to just shitting on it and taking their money.
Or else they do a promotion relegation situation based on geography, where the bottom team in that pool of 6 teams in the Northern Hemisphere would go into a playoff against USA or Georgia, whoever it may be. And if they lose that playoff, they get relegated, and that team comes up to the top tier of the World Nations Championship. So that promotion relegation thing is going to be a factor in this. It's not going to be ring-fenced, because that is the reason why this fell down a couple of years ago. One of the other reasons why it fell down was because of player welfare. You know, Owen Farrell coming out a couple of years ago saying that this was not going to be good for player welfare. Like, this does not look any better for player welfare at the end of it, not least because you're going to try and squeeze in an extra November weekend for this final. So you've got your regular window and then a final on top of that. The clubs are not going to go for that, are they? They're not going to allow their players away for any longer than they are. You're going to have a Lions Summer World Cup warm-up summer. You're going to have your World Nations Championship summer. The rugby calendar is already chaotically packed. This will just add more madness to it. I think the idea behind it is to make these international windows more meaningful, and I like that. But to actually make this happen, you would like to think that it would take a complete rethink of the rugby calendar rather than layering more... I was going to say crap because some of the ideas are good, but layering more stuff on top of an already pretty complicated situation.
Buenos Aires to Tokyo was pretty difficult to do. The first one that came up was through Sao Paulo and then through New York, and then New York to Narita, and then there is like one, I guess you have to charter planes that can fly direct. Can you fly? You can't, obviously.
Unless everybody goes to the one location and all the games are played there, but that's very like a World Cup, you know, you can't be doing that then. So I don't know, does it devalue the World Cup having this?
Well, no. Does anybody care about this? Hey, we're the champions of this thing which started 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Hey, well, we had a final which we won. Well, I guess it's extra silverware, you know? I mean, they managed to turn the European Cup into something pretty quickly.
Yeah. I would argue that people already care about the summer and November tests.
Well,
so you're all of a sudden adding.
But you're never going to have a 3-test tour to New Zealand ever again.
Yeah, okay, so that the touring element does get devalued a little bit. I wonder, would the Lions, the people who run the British and Irish Lions, be a little bit concerned about this as well, where you're like, are you poisoning the idea of the test culture in rugby, or which the Lions are based on?
Maybe you're the only one that's left, and so therefore it seems amazing. Like, that's the other thing, is that, and there's never going to be a Lions versus Argentina or a Lions versus Japan test series. I mean, I say never, right? Who knows? If it needs most, money will talk. But just what about a sustainable, the big brands like sustainability, the CO2 emissions that are coming up on my Google flights here, like 2,700 kilos per person.
That is a lot. That's a big number.
Well, when you add in like the amount of players that you're going to require for this 3-test series in 2 different hemispheres over a 3-week period, I mean, you're going to need like 60 players. Maybe you send one team to Argentina and another team to... I get that rugby is screwed. I understand it. I understand why it's screwed. But this seems to be trying to fix a problem that doesn't really need fixed, does it? But what they need is that everybody plays the same calendar. So when they're playing, we're playing. And when they're not playing, we're not playing. And so when the World Cup happens, everybody's on an equal footing. And that the test series seems to work quite well, doesn't it? Mostly.
But I think, to be fair, that is why they're trying to create this, because they feel that they have a situation that there are allowances made for those tests, and they're pretty good as they stand. How do you incentivise them further? I do think the level of travel in the summer will be outrageous, even from just a player welfare standpoint. Like Daniel Schofield in the Telegraph makes the point that rugby just needs to tear the whole thing up and start again. But that's not going to happen. So this actually isn't as bad a scenario as you might think, that if you realise that you're going to just have to add something on, this isn't the worst idea in the world.
Andrew Garrity says, any love for Georgia in the Six Nations? It's supposed to be a great trip.
Like it would no doubt be a great trip, but like my concern about Georgia is that we've seen good moments from them over the last few years. Maybe wasn't it that autumn tournament that Ireland played in 2020 against them, and there was a little bit of a scare in that game. But if they come up against Six Nations teams in Six Nations form, really going hell for leather on it, you fear that they'd have the same fate as Italy. Yeah,
I mean, Georgia and Italy should have the opportunity to intermix, like one year, and then maybe one of them might get good after a period of time. John Claffey says rugby should go with Plan B. I think Plan B seems to work for everybody. A little local based league, which actually is the be all and end all. That's a good idea. We need to keep the summer tours as they are, says James McCullough. Previously we did a test in New Zealand and then a test in Australia. We used to get smashed as we didn't have time to get over jet lag before we played. They were like a good opportunity for us to see how we were doing versus and when New Zealand come and they do the 4 tests and try and do a Grand Slam, like, that's class. Like, there's something about that. France always feel a little bit left out, but maybe we could kick one of the other teams out. No, and then occasionally we kick that ourselves.
Screw France.
I mean, okay, yeah, fair enough. Never give a sucker an even break.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the crack with that. You did a very good explaining there. I haven't a clue what's going on.
Neither do I. Yeah, it's the meme of the dog at the computer being like, I have no idea what I'm doing. That is me trying to look at this.
That is us this morning, yeah.